Greetings and welcome back. Give you guys for those of you who always wanted to play football and didn't, give you a chance to put your helmets on at home. We are coming out here in chapter 8 for the second half, right? The second half of the course. We're going to get into political geography this time around. And I told you a story last time about, about Mrs. Derry. I got another one here I heard. We'll call it the story of two men, and I can't remember the names. We'll call them Nate and Harvey. Nate and Harvey grew up in the same town, and as young boys developed a friendship. Went to high school, of course, the same high school, and began, dating girls that were friends with one another, and they ended up going to the same college, Nate and Harvey, and ended up getting married to girls to women that knew one another, and they ended up buying homes, Nate and Harvey, right next to one another, and everything was fine until one of their sons left home and went to college or whatever, came back, and Nate or Harvey set up a little mobile home in the backyard for the boy, and the mobile home went just a couple of feet over into the other friend's yard. And to make a long story short, it ended up becoming a boundary issue with these two, and ended up severing the relationship of all things a couple of feet on a boundary. But it got me thinking about how boundaries are. Well, we all got a little bit of territorial in us, right? And we're going to talk about that in this chapter, another interesting chapter. So if you want to turn to chapter 8 and start getting ready for the visuals, and there are going to be a lot of them. Some of them are going to be very pertinent to understanding some of the concepts in this section. Let me, while you're doing that, let me turn to our lecture models. Let me see where we want to go here. Okay, several objectives this time. I want to distinguish between a state and a nation, and that looks like a good quiz question. We want to explain the effectiveness of a state based on its shape, right? Based on its shape. Yes, I'm not saying that, but in geographical circles, that is believed to have some kind of an effect on a nation's productivity, its camaraderie amongst its citizenry, right? We'll examine that today. We'll recognize the unifying and splintering forces in the United States or in a society. Your discussion later on in the week will focus on that. We want to understand the boundaries that reach beyond land masses, right? And recognize undemocratic political processes through manipulation of political boundaries, right? Not good things. It's one of the major heads up terms in this section. We're going to be talking about a state. Now, in geographic terms and, in international terms, it's not generally referred to as countries, right? It's states, some kind of political entity. Nation, that's basically the folks that occupy the state. And then your nation state, that's your boundaries. That's your boundaries. Then you have your various shapes of states, which I alluded to. You have your elongated shapes that, from north to south. Then you have your compact states, which are more closest to being circular. Exclaves, tricky, separating us from enclaves. Exclaves are politically connected to another state, although they're surrounded by another state. Enclaves are surrounded by a state, but are not politically connected to another state. Then you have your various types of boundaries. You have your artificial and your um, geographic boundaries. You know, your artificial boundaries are natural boundaries, and you have your geographic boundaries, and they're broken down into several. You have your subsequent boundaries that are drawn up after the cultural landscape was formed. You have consequent boundaries, which are drawn up to placate some kind of an ethnic group. You have your superimposed boundaries that are forced boundaries, not good ones. They're forced by an occupying country. Then you have your centripetal and centrifugal forces, which probably will funnel out toward your discussion at the end of the week. The centripetal forces are your negative forces, or your unifying forces. Are they things that unify a people? Centrifugal, these are the disruptive forces, right, that sever us. And then again, geography, so many cool themes in there. You have boundaries even out on the seas, right? The EEZ. You're going to need a visual I think, to decipher that. And we have one. The EEZ, exclusive economic zones. And then lastly, a bad thing, gerrymandering, political gerrymandering, manipulating political boundaries, right? Both parties do it. I'll emphasize that too. So let's move into this. And I'm going to get into the states and the sovereign entities. A state is a political entity with sovereign control over its foreign and domestic activities. A nation is a people occupying that state. Right? They have shared cultural characteristics. They believe what they believe, and the customs that they employ. You know, those characteristics. They're kind of gets into those subcultures, right? Their belief systems about the way a society should be run, right? The ideology of it, customs they employ. There's a strong ethnocentrism that is the underlying element for the unification. Then your nation states. These are the boundaries of the cultural unity of the folks that are occupying that nation. And these boundaries help people share a unifying distinctiveness. Figure 8.4 on to 18. You will want to turn to that, especially you visual guys and girls out there. Page 218, figure 8.4. Now, a colony, hear about colonies. A colony is not a state. It's not a state in that there are no cultural or physical lines that give one political independence, which would therefore help assure a conscious attempt at delineating one sovereign rights from another. In fact, an interesting illustration your authors have is figure 8.3. I think it's page 217. Even Antarctica, you'll want to take a look at that. Even Antarctica has boundaries drawn up. Now, no one has a government set up there, but you'll see that several nations have laid claims to it. You know, it's basically a research laboratory, but they've laid claims to it. And you know, while you're doing that too, I'm just thinking that you might want to take a look at who's laying claims to it and see if it makes sense geographically, right? Look at we're looking at geography, look at a map, and see if proximity has anything to do with the claims. Sometimes they don't. Now, there was a rapid number of sovereign states that cropped up since the end of World War II. These were a result of European carvings. Page 219, you could see that I can't remember what figure it was. I don't have it written down here, but on page 219, you'll see a map of Africa. And you could see the European carvings, the European boundaries that were drawn up. And perhaps the disarray among European countries during the first half of that century. Colonies began to adopt the philosophy that it may serve their long-term purposes better if they were in control of their own affairs. So, being that they had cultural connections that the Europeans could never, begin to understand, um, Europeans began to, move. But there was a few things. That was it's probably again like a pie. There, you had three big pieces there. That was one of them. Another one was there were revolutions. Africans did not like Europeans there controlling their governments and their resources. And, you know, thirdly, Europe was recovering economically from World War II. So maintaining all of that was draining them. So there you have that, states and sovereign entities. I'm going to take a look now at a very interesting concept in geography, and that's the effect of a state's shape. And you can turn figure 8-7, page 222. And again, it's your choice whether you want to look at that before I talk or after, but you can look at the various, get familiar with the various shapes. And here's the idea, just kind of setting this up. The states may be described in terms of their size, shape, and location. Each attribute, the idea here is that each attribute affects the state's stability and well-being. States have their core areas or their heartlands of importance and greatest development. Capital cities are usually located within the core. Relocation away from the capital city may signal state determination to achieve unity or to encourage development out and maybe in the peripheral zones. And we'll see that when we get the autonomous movements, separatist movements, that sometimes the farther away the capital is causes problems because they don't, some of these groups, especially if they're minority ethnic groups, they tend to feel dislocated, disconnected, which causes problems. We'll talk about that a little bit. Turn to figure 222 or figure 8-7, 222. Size and shape. Size and shape affect a country's effectiveness. In that the larger country has more access to natural resources. Although this is not a guarantee. This is not a guarantee, as the lack of natural resources in Russia and Canada, your two biggest states, it's become a detriment to those states. And the larger the state, the more difficult it is to have a culturally homogenous population. Against a $64 geographic term to say sameness, right? So it's difficult to have a culturally homogenous population. And as you guys know, human weakness, part of it is if there's anything different, there are more than a few people who just cannot handle that, right? It's also more difficult to link effective transportation systems. It's more difficult to do that in a bigger state while having large boundaries to defend. And we had mentioned this when we looked at maps. I know as a boy, and I'm sure a lot of Canadians probably looked at this too. As a boy, you're kind of looking at the map, picturing it in your mind as linear. So during the Cold War, you think, the Soviet Union, they're way over on the other side of the world. They're going to drop a bomb or something on us. But when you look at the Earth, right, we did this with the maps a little bit. And you look at, from the reality, the spherical sense, Soviet Union was just across the Arctic Ocean from Canada. So powers that be, and your general Canadian, they were aware of that during that time period, and was not a small subject of anxiety for certainly the government and probably the nation as well. But shape comes into play in that countries like Sweden, I have Sweden and Chile on here, but I'm thinking Norway and Italy, which are long and narrow. That type of shape tends to cultivate logistical problems. for the government because, and here's the thing, um, it's expensive to link some places to the core. There's more diversity of climate, resources, and cultures. And again, you're going, I mean, they generally, the elongated states go from north to south. And you go north to south, you have ranges of climate. And with ranges of climate, you have different kinds of economic activities, right? That people can engage in, which is going to bring more productivity toward into certain areas. And again, another human weakness. Some of us, more than a few of us, we just don't like it when someone's making a dollar more than we do, right? You know what I'm saying here. You get the picture. And they could be a drain on national unity too. In Sweden, up by the Arctic Circle, you have the cultural group, the Lapps. And the Lapps, their primary, this is true, their primary economic activity is raising reindeer. Yes. And it's not a big deal. I wouldn't think, but to a lot of Swedes down in Stockholm and Malmö, um, it's they look at them as embarrassment. So, but these are called elongated states. Your most efficient type of shape is the one of a circle. Is one of a circle, and the shape of a circle would place the capital in the middle, and the time it took to reach other areas would be relatively the same, right? So no one feels like it's unfair, I suppose. And these are called compact states, and you can see that in your visual. The expenses for transportation, the logic goes, would be comparatively cheaper than that of an elongated shape and maybe some other shapes that you can see on that page. The borders would be probably easier to defend. And again, like I said, this type of shape is considered a compact shape. Now on the same page, you can see exclaves and enclaves. And your exclave, that's one state that is completely surrounded by another, but politically connected to another state. West Berlin, back in the days of the Cold War, was classic. In the East German side, which was communist, the city of Berlin, and you got most of you guys, maybe all of you know this, so pardon me if I don't mean to insult anyone's intelligence, was divided up into four quadrants. Soviets had one, but you had three Western democracies in the other quadrants of the city, but you're right in the middle of East Germany, the communist part of the side of the Iron Curtain. So that was a classic example of an exclave. You had three quadrants of that city were surrounded by a communist entity in that regard, but connected elsewhere. An enclave is a little different. You can see Lesotho there on figure 8-7. So an enclave is like a perforated state which completely surrounds an exclave. Other examples of that would be Vatican City, right? Vatican City in the middle of Italy. Vatican City is its own political entity. Lesotho in South Africa. So they're not politically connected to anything else, even though they're surrounded as well as the exclaves were. That's the big difference. The enclaves are not politically connected. Let's take a look at our boundaries. How are boundaries classified? And you can see your notes there. Natural boundaries. Natural boundaries. These are your physical boundaries. These are physical features such as mountains, rivers, deserts, lakes, and they form these, as I say here, these recognizable physical boundaries. Figure 8-12 in your chapter is a picture of the Alps, right? And several political boundaries find themselves going through the Alps. So that's your natural boundaries, and the rest I'm going to talk about are artificial. And these are considered geometric boundaries, okay? Boundaries that are cordoned off by latitude and longitude. Great example of this, I think, is on figure 821, page 232, and it's the western portion of the U.S.-Canadian border, or otherwise known as the 49th parallel. Or these are called antecedent boundaries, right? Antecedent boundaries. They're formed before it was populated, right? They were formed before it was populated. Antecedent boundaries. Then you have your subsequent boundaries. They're drawn up after the cultural landscape had been formed. Then your consequent boundaries. Consequent boundaries are boundaries to accommodate ethnicity. The most famous, probably Northern Ireland, right? Northern Ireland, you have your Unionists who look to stay, to be a part of England. And so that section of Ireland is to placate that that group. Then you have your superimposed boundaries, and on page, I think it's 219, you have your forced, yeah, it's the map of Africa, right? Your forced boundaries by an occupying country. For example, your colonial powers in the 1800s. I'll say this too about that. I enlarge on this more when we get into world regional geography, when we actually camp out on the various regions of the world. Africa has problems of its own, right? It's getting harder maybe to blame things in Africa on the past. But one of the, I mean, it's like a stairwell, and the bottom steps were rotten. And one of the reasons they got rotten and had it provided a bad foundation was this type of stuff. The colonizing there, the European powers drew up. There was already boundary issues, and they drew up even expanded on that. So when they left, there was tribal disagreements, and it still lasts to this day, unfortunately. Also, your superimposed lines were left by the British too. When leaving India in the late 1940s, this was designed to mollify the Muslims in Pakistan and the Hindus in India, and that's been a problem in Kashmir right up to the present hour. So now, because getting into conflicts now, because proximity invites conflict, border disputes of several different types are widespread. Water bodies, patterns of ethnicity, and natural resources are common sources of boundary conflicts. Let's take a look at these, break them down. Your first type of boundary conflict, and how I'm going to outline this little section here, I'm going to have the number one, the boundary conflict, and I'm going to have some subpoints to that of what I call pressure points, right? Pressure points. And with your first conflict would be your landlocked states. Landlocked states. And these types of states make up about 20%, 1/5 of the world states. And to trade, they must have cooperation with neighboring states. Figure 815, I have focused on page 227. This issue is a problem for Sudan and one of the newer states in the world, South Sudan. Don't really have any pressure points there. Second type of boundary conflict would be water bodies. And these are boundary lines that must be established when a body of water is concerned. Some pressure points when there's use of a watershed boundary. And the use of a watershed boundary is one that runs along a ridge or some kind of drainage area crest. And the most famous of that, which has caused some problems down on the borders of Argentina and Chile. Figure 816 on page 228 gives you an illustration of that. Another pressure point to water bodies are rivers that change course. Best example I could think of this, the Rio Grande, right down the border of Texas and Mexico. Or where the boundary line between two countries lie in a lake, right? Think Lake Ontario, Lake Erie, right? Our Great Lakes. And then your last pressure point with the water bodies, where a river flows downstream from another country and the water use becomes an issue, especially when the water is scarce in hot, dry, arid areas like the Mideast again. The Nile River Valley, right, is a great example of this. I'm trying to think of the best examples if I can. Third type of boundary conflict is what I call minority group ID. Minority group ID. And we have several pressure points here. You have minority group overspill. Best example, Hitler and the Sudetenland of Czechoslovakia. There were pockets in the north, west, and in the south of Czechoslovakia of Sudeten Germans. And Hitler wanted that, to annex that as part of Germany. And getting into a little history here, and this led to the whole, we're going to have peace in our time comment by Prime Minister Chamberlain in England, which made him look foolish. Hitler, his promise was, look, if you guys will just give that to me, I'm satisfied. You guys won't have to worry about me anymore. And the powers that be in Europe agreed to that, and that led to Chamberlain's, we're going to have peace in our time now. Well, we know what happened, right? And then after World War II, those Germans were, of course, Germany couldn't keep that territory, and those Germans were expelled, and it's now populated by a lot of Czechs. A second pressure point for a minority group ID is a distinct ethnic group located in two countries or a home country and another as a result of ethnocentrism and nationalism. And they try and create an ethnic nation from the latter. Figure 817, page 229, focuses on the Basque region. The Basques are in northern Spain, but they bleed over into France. And back in the 90s, once a year, probably into the 2000s too, maybe even today, I don't know if it happens as much, but in order to get the attention of the Spanish government, they would just blow something up like a train down in Madrid. And so the Basques felt disconnected. The last of the minority group ID pressure points, a totally contained separatist movement, the U.S. Civil War. And this kind of ties into a point I'm coming up to next about centrifugal and centripetal forces in a country. Your video, I got a short 3-minute video I want you guys to watch. A political commentator is going to be talking about, are we heading for another civil war here in the United States? Fourth pressure point, or fourth boundary conflict will be resource disputes. Probably knew that was coming. Great example of this, the United States and Canada over the Georges Banks fishing grounds. The Magnuson Act was signed then in 1984, and Canada was granted the northeast corner off the United States coast, about 200 miles off the coast of Nova Scotia. Another pressure point for resources would be policy disagreements with neighbors, right? Illegals and drugs from Mexico and the United States. International significant resource in a border region, oil reserves in Iraq and Kuwait. Figure 819, page 230. That was the issue, really, that got us involved in Desert Storm. Back in early 1991, Saddam invaded Kuwait to annex the oil fields, and you can see it on that that illustrate that map there, you can see where it kind of bleeds over into the oil fields, it bleeds over into Kuwait. We were kind of worried, and so was the West, that he was going to raise market oil prices. And but Saddam, I remember this too. Saddam said that, well, that used to be Iraq, and he was right. Again, the British, when the British after the Crimean War, um, they were one of the victors, and victors, determined the spoils, and they began to carve up boundaries, and they did that with Iraq. And you guys will see these. Your lab this week will be working out of the CIA World Fact Book. I'm going to have you look at the various boundary conflicts around the globe, and what the United States boundary conflicts that we are involved in. And then the last of the boundary conflicts would be resources that one state claims it must have in order to survive, regardless if it does not lie in someone's sovereign border. Big one here is water in Palestine, and the issue of Jerusalem, and the issue of Israel being there with, in Jerusalem, not Israel. Well, Israel is a state, but the nation of Israel. Arabs have been kind of sore about that since 1948. And one of the big reasons is, outside of what to do with Jerusalem and the religious significance, which you'll probably never be able to change, is water. What do you do? I mean, so they felt there that we already had water issues here, and now you have an influx in the late 40s of non-Arabs, and pushing Arabs out of the region into other countries that are having water problems. So water politics big in that part of the globe. Now, states are subject to centrifugal and centripetal forces, and they gain strength from the institutions that promote nationalism, and from effective organizations, from transportation and communication system networks that foster some kind of political integration. Let's take a look at this. Forces within a state. Your centripetal forces are those forces that unify folks, right? They assist the functions of a state. Whereas the centrifugal, they disrupt the unity of a country. And we'll talk about that with the discussions, right, in connection with the United States. Nationalism can fill both forces. It acts as a badge that rallies folks around national goals. But in light of that, however, few countries are completely homogenous. Remember that word, that $64 word. Very few countries are the same, have just aggregate sameness throughout the country. So nationalism can act as a centrifugal force, a negative force as a result of that. National camaraderie can be achieved, though, through elementary schools, where kids are primarily learning about their own country. The military can serve as such. A state church can be served as a rallying point as well. In the past, in Europe, that was more of the case. Today, your state churches there become basic museums, I think. The government can be seen as a rallying symbol if it is seen as fair in its distribution of resources. And then finally, transportation systems can serve as a rallying point. Great example of this is the Transcontinental Railroad of Canada. Early on, that connected Eastern Canada to the West. There was a poll taken in 90s, 2000s, I think it was the 90s maybe, to Canadians. What are you most proud of as a Canadian? And their national healthcare system was at the top, but the Transcontinental Railroad was second. Autonomous movements, separatist movements. Autonomous movements share the same characteristics in that they occupy a specific territory and they feel overlooked. They feel overlooked by the core political engine of the country. They therefore identify with their region, a la the Basques I mentioned earlier, than they do with the state. Some of the most active movements are in Quebec, Canada, the United Kingdom, the Irish in Ireland, the Irish Catholics in Ireland, who would like the British to govern elsewhere, right? Get out of Ireland. In Spain with the Basques. Again, page 235. Quebec, FYI here, every 10 years they have a referendum in Quebec to see whether the Quebecois want to leave Canada. And I think it was in the 90s again. If they get 50% or more that say, yes, we would like to leave Canada, they have the option to do that. And they came awfully close in the 90s, I think it was 49.5%. So a lot of laws are crafted to placate the Quebecois, the Francophones in Quebec, which upsets a lot of English-speaking Canadians, especially out west, the oil-producing provinces where most of the money is. A lot of that money siphoned off for taxes to feed the national government in Ontario, and political issues in Quebec for the Francophones who feel like maybe their culture is being swallowed up again. We get into that in depth in world regional geography, so I got to move on. Can't talk about that. I like that one. The movements tend to be away from the central moving and shaking of domestic politics, and are rather out in the rural areas, therefore causing them to feel excluded. So the dominant group is also seen as exploiting and suppressing, a la Quebec and the Francophones. Language, social benefits. Turn to page, it's figure 824, page 238. I want you to see the water boundaries, okay, and the laws on that. And as you're turning there, recognizing the economic, political, and military benefits of cooperation, states have banded together in a variety of supranational associations. And one of them is the International Law of the Sea, right? The International Law of the Sea. And that delimits territorial boundaries and rights by defining zones of diminishing state control. Well, territorial sovereignty, you can look at your graphic there, up to 12 nautical miles in breadth. So a state has complete sovereignty on what can go through there, what can be researched, up to 12 nautical miles in breadth. Now, your nautical mile, just kind of an FYI, is it's 6,082 feet. So it's about 800 feet longer than your statute mile. 800 feet longer. All vessels have the right of passage through this zone. Military and research vessels may be stopped, though. Then you have your contagious zone. That's up to 24 miles. States can enforce laws out there, even though they do not have entire sovereignty. Then you have your exclusive economic zone, your EEZ, right? This area is up to 200 nautical miles. The state acknowledges the rights to work with the natural resources. States can claim rights to resources within the continental shelf, as you can see there, up to about 350 miles out. However, there is freedom of the seas that are to be maintained, and the high seas, therefore, they're open to everyone. Then, lastly, in most countries, the actions of these subnational political organizations have a direct impact on the folks. Two aspects of political organization of interest are representation and fragmentations of power. The way boundaries are drawn around voting districts can maximize or minimize the power of a group of people. Gerrymandering can unfairly favor one political party over another. In the United States, a great many local gerrymantle units have been developed with this kind of overlapping jurisdiction and responsibilities. Page 244 of your textbook, you can see the original gerrymander. And well, because of time, I won't do it, but I will strongly recommend that you read that caption of how all this got started. It's not a good thing. So gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is the method of drawing up voting districts to favor one's political party or particular politicians. And the way boundaries are drawn up can make or break the power of a group. The way electoral differences are drawn affect voting results. So they are actually a way for parties to cut deals with each other and provide safe seats for their incumbents, right? Both parties do it. The congressional district where I am in has been redistricted to something that is shaped more symmetrical, but for years, in order to protect certain politicians, it looked like the gerrymander shape on page 444. Let me show you of one that I'm not going to talk about the person's political party, but down in down in North Carolina, there was a politician. His name was Watt, and Watt had, here's I-95. That's I-95, and Watt had a district that went, I don't know how many miles out beyond I-95, but it wasn't right up on I-95. And the area along I-95 was, well, I guess I got to tell you this. I don't want to, I'm not trying to pick sides. I just remember this one here. Along I-95 was generally, I don't know if you see my dots there, was about 90% African American. And, it's not my opinion. African Americans, about 92% vote the Democratic ticket. Congressman Watt was a Democrat, but North Carolina is a burgeoning healthcare state. And you had a lot of people moving in out here. And this was always a safe seat for Watt. This was Democrat out here as well. But you started to have people moving in that when they were doing polling weren't necessarily maybe going to vote Mr. Watt's way. So, and I can't, probably because North Carolina is actually a Republican state. It's probably a Republican that had a district out here or something who could have benefited from these votes. Mr. Watt wouldn't. So what they did was they ended up basically dissolving the the width and breadth of his district. So he would still stay in office, and it would benefit, I think, would probably benefit a Republican on the outlier areas. So this is what they do. They basically, this is known, and I agree with this wholeheartedly. This is known as a incumbent protection racket, right? Not a good thing. Happens all the time. So, and that is that for chapter 8. You have your graphic organizer for you visual types. You can go back over this and chunk up the major concepts. And got some things up ahead here that are a little different from got the regular drill, but I have some things I want to, it's the same recipe, but maybe some different different elements in the cake. Okay. Tuesday, you have a video, Politics and the Coming Secessionist Movement. It's about a 3-minute video. It's a political commentator who is coming from a conservative, he's coming from a conservative viewpoint. But that's not the point. He's talking about the kind of things that could draw the country into something like this, a secessionist movement. And I tried, I couldn't find it. There was an article by someone, I couldn't remember who the author was. He was talking about how you have a civil war when you have someone in power, and if over 50% of that population will not accept the person in power, you could have a bad situation. The political commentator, I think he's talking about disgruntled voters, but anyway, I think you'll find it interesting. I want you to look at that, tie that in if you can with the discussions later on in the week, because I'm going to be focusing on centrifugal and centripetal elements here in the United States today, and we all know politics is a big piece of that pie, right? Wednesday, we're gonna do a group assignment. We're gonna be working with reading guides, and the reading guides. See if I can get one of these out here. The reading guides are basically, I break them up into concepts. The concepts that we had talked about here on the lecture, and the reading guides have. The reading guides have text explicit questions, like right on the page, tells you exactly where the answer is in the paragraph, and then think and search. Think and search, you have to do that. You have to read between the lines, get the answers. They're generally not too far out of the neighborhood from your right on the page answers, okay? So what we're gonna have you do on Wednesday, I'm gonna break you guys up into groups of 4 or 5 people, however many concepts are on the reading guide. And what you'll do is you'll act as a jigsaw puzzle. What I'm going to ask you guys to do is assign each other a concept, research it, and then come back together as a group and teach one another. They're not long answers. You'll teach one another, and then you guys will, type them in and then send them to me by the end of the day. All right. And I'll have instructions on the assignment when you're going to download it too. So I'll, be writing the same things I'm talking about now. So you'll have that. That'll be due Wednesday. And the labs, nothing really different there. You are going to be working out of, I'm going to be diverting you to the CIA fact book, and you're going to be looking at boundary issues around the globe. Who has the most? What are they about? I think I have one on there about, what are some issues the U.S. has and who's it with? And then you have the rest of the drill. About Friday, we began economic geography, agriculture, and primary activities. So that is it from here. I will talk to you then when we get into chapter 9. So otherwise, you guys have just a fantastic week, and you guys know how to get a hold of me. Don't hesitate to do that. All right. So I'm looking regularly. Okay. Bye.